Good morning. I'm Kyle Gatlin, senior pastor, and I know there's a handful of people in here that like doing things all alone, but we are social creatures. We are created to do things with other people. So I want to have a public service announcement today. Public service announcements for all you people that like doing solo stuff. Here are top 10 things that you cannot do by yourself. Number 10, form a Congo line. You cannot do that. Number 9, play Marco Polo. You can't. Have you tried? You tried that? Not fun. Number 8, have a pillow fight. Have a pillow. Yeah, anybody tried that before? Right. Number 7, play rock paper scissors. So be hard to do paper. Anyway, have a tickle fight. Number 6. Some of y'all tried that before by yourself. You ever tried that? All right. Number 5, sing a duet. Really hard to do that, although if during COVID, a lot of people did that with like 5 different takes on Zoom or 5 different screens and stuff like that. Number 4, play tug of war. You ever tried? Pretty hard to do that. Number 3, get married. Yeah, you're laughing, but you know. Have y'all heard about this? All right. A man in France, his name is Antoine Cheval. After 17 failed relationships, he's 18 years old. No, I don't know how old he is. I have no idea how old he is. After 17 failed relationships, he married himself. It's happened this year. It happened March of this year. Dude married himself. I would show you pictures, but it would freak you out. So I'm not going to. So apparently, getting married for 99.999% of the world, you can't do by yourself, but apparently you can, right? It's France. Okay, that's all I got to say is France. All right, number 2, form a human pyramid. And the last thing, number one thing you cannot do by yourself is be in a community. So Bobby reminded us last week that we go all the way back to Genesis, that we are created out of relationship for relationship. You all go back to the Genesis story. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, we see that encapsulated in that first original story, the origin story of us, that there's a relationship. And because God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit is in a relationship, He created us to be in relationship too. In fact, He even said when Adam was walking around by himself, twiddling his thumbs, naming animals, oh, that's not good. He needs something else better to do. So He sent somebody else. He gave him somebody else. He knew it was not working out, that solo was not working out. Man, we were created to be in relationship. All right? So God started that because that's God's character. All right? So as we get into this story, we saw Genesis, so we see it in Genesis. Next week, Bobby's going to take us through the early church and how the community was related in the human church, the first church. We see community there, but we're going to land on Jesus today. So we're looking at Jesus. So we're really scanning, the gamut of the Bible story, of the biblical story, and we're seeing this relationship in different parts, which means it's all the way through the Bible, which I hope that you've realized that by now. All right, so we get to Matthew chapter 12. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside wanting to speak to you." He replied, "Who is my mother and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers." Now, when we look at that on the surface, we go, Jesus is just like dissing his family. It's like Jesus has moved on from his family and he's doing something bigger, better, and all this other stuff. That's what it appears to be what's going on, but that's not the case. Jesus is not abandoning his family. He's expanding his family. He's expanding his family. Because he says this. Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. So what he's doing is he's redefining family as disciples. So he's expanding it. At this point, he had a number of people around him, and he looks at all those people and says, this is my family now. My family is not going to be limited to simply flesh and blood. My family is those who are disciples, those who are my disciples. So, and who is a disciple? He just said, a disciple is one who does the will of the Father. So he wasn't limiting that to just a few people. He says, who is in my family? The disciples. Who are disciples? Those who do the will of God, those who follow God's direction, those who follow God's purpose. That is now my family. That's who I belong to, and that's who belongs to me. So I want to back up and look at how did Jesus get to this point to where he says this about his disciples. And so I want to go back all the way to Luke chapter 4. Luke chapter 4, verse 24. Jesus says, truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his hometown. Now, here's the story. All right, Jesus has been in the wilderness. He's been in the desert for 40 days. And that's when Satan has tempted him 3 different times within those 40 days of fasting, actually. And I think in one place it actually says no food and water. So sort of miraculous 40 days, truthfully. But during those 40 days, he turned away Satan and endured all 3 temptations. The angels gave him food and water, basically rejuvenated his strength. As he comes back from that experience, he goes to his hometown and he goes to the synagogue. Now, the synagogue is a natural place for Jesus to be. When Jesus was 12 years old, we get a snapshot just at one time when he was 12 years old. He was lost from his parents. They had gone, as accustomed to gone to Jerusalem, as they had to do at that time of year. And they left, went back home. He was not there. They had to go back. And he basically said, what's up? Where'd you think I was going to be? I have to be in my Father's house. So he was accustomed to being in a synagogue, conversing with the scholars, the teachers, the scribes, all those people. He was accustomed to being around them. So this was not unusual for him to be in the synagogue. He comes back from this high experience where he has just beaten Satan back, and you can make the case that the battle at the cross was won there in the desert. Right? You can make that case that the battle was won there. The victory was won there. It just took a number of years for it to come to fruition. So as he comes back, he's on the spiritual high. He goes to synagogue, starts talking to those other leaders. And like they always do, they're looking back at the Old Testament. We consider the Old Testament. They're looking back at the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They're looking back at some of the prophets that they had written, recorded, or at least orally were telling them about the stories. And Jesus said, you know what we've been reading about this Messiah that the prophets talked about? You know all these things we're looking forward to as a people about the Messiah coming? They go, He said, here he is. No, he didn't say that. All right. He says, basically, I am the Messiah. He who was to come as the Messiah is in your midst. And of course, what did they all do? They all bowed down to him. They threw flowers at his feet. No, they did not. They said, you're nuts. You're Joseph's boy. You're a carpenter's son. You're nobody. There's no way that this is you. Things got so bad. Things got so bad when he proclaimed to be the Messiah, the one coming to save the people, right? Things got so bad, a mob formed, and they were going to throw him over a cliff. Literally, they're going to throw him over a cliff. Now Luke gives us Luke, and Luke gives us Acts. But this story is strange. It's probably one of the most underrated lines you read in the scriptures. But as this mob is gathered to kill him, to toss him over the cliff, Luke simply writes this: he walked right through the crowd and left. That's basically what he said. He had nobody with him, right? You understand this? It's not like he had bodyguards like all of our college coaches have, kicking people out of the way. He had nobody. He was there by himself. They were trying to kill him for what they would consider blasphemy, him claiming to be God, the Messiah. And he walks through the crowd and nobody touches him. Strangest thing, right? Strangest thing you ever read. But Luke just says, this is the way it is, right? I would have wanted to know a little more detail. I would have wanted to know a little more detail. All right. Now, what goes on after this is really interesting. Okay, remember, Jesus then, he begins teaching. Jesus begins healing people. And so he's already gathering a crowd. People are naturally coming or flocking to him. And at one point, right after this instant where he left his hometown, he's at a seaside. He's speaking and preaching, and the people have gathered there. And some guys are out fishing. They've been fishing all night. They come back toward the shore where Jesus is preaching, and they're tired. They're ready to go to bed. But this crowd's in their way. They can't do much. And Jesus turns to them and said, hey, drop your nets down. And the guys said, you're a carpenter's son. You don't know nothing about nothing, right? You don't know anything about fishing. But they did it anyway. And they caught this huge amount of fish. And we pick up the story here. Peter and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon Peter's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore and left everything and followed him. So this is the first recording that we have Jesus after having these crowds gathered. He's been healing people, whatever. Now he's beginning to pull people into his group. He's pull more into his inner circle. We got these three now are pulled into his inner circle. But he didn't stop at three. Listen to this. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. That's also in Luke. So we've moved quickly from Jesus escaping his family and the mob of people trying to kill him to now he's surrounding himself not with 3, but has expanded to 12. Now, in that text you right there we just read, you see that there were others, but he only designated 12. He only said, these are 12 that I need. I don't need 13. I don't need 23. I don't need 53. I don't need 72 at this point. I need these 12. I need these 12. So, what I think happened when he's up there praying to Jesus, praying to God, and said, "Okay, God, we got 11. You think we need one more? I think we need one more. All right. So, Ocean's 11. Anybody? Okay. All right. So he's got these 12 guys. He's got these 12, and these are the pick of the litter, for lack of a better way to say it, because there were other guys following him, but he chose just the 12. Just the 12. These were the ones that were going to be alongside him for the journey, for this journey of faith. He purposely just limited to 12 that he was going to invest his time into. All right? Remember the first 3 he called? Those 3 ended up being the subgroup of this. You know, Peter, James, and John ended up being those that he seemed to gravitate to when he wanted to have a little more alone time. And he just pulled those 3. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. What's going on here is the synagogue leader's daughter. He goes into that household, and he's going to heal her. He's going to raise her up. But he only brings these 3 guys with him. And we see this throughout Jesus' life a few other times. When he went to the Transfiguration, went up the Mount of what we call the Mount of Transfiguration, where Moses and Elijah show up, he only took these 3 guys with him. There was another healing. Peter's mother-in-law was to be healed. He took these 3 guys with him. So I think the reason I think he did that because he needed James and John to say, yes, Peter, let him do it. Let him anyway. So some of y'all got that, right? The last time that he brought these three outside of the 12, he pulled these three closer to him was in Gethsemane. He pulled these three to Gethsemane when he was praying. He knew the arrest was coming. He knew the torture was coming. He knew the crucifixion was coming. And he pulled these three closer guys to him for some reason. For some reason. And we also understand this. Jesus also, we only can have one bestie, right? Jesus' bestie was Peter. I tell you, Peter, on this rock, you will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So out of the 12, it would narrow down to 3, and then truthfully, Jesus had handpicked Peter as his go-to guy. As much as Peter had disappointed Jesus, Jesus knew that at 3 o'clock in the morning, he could call Peter. If he needed to make one phone call, he had something he needed, somebody he could count on, he knew it was Peter. Now, why do you think that Jesus surrounded himself with these 12 and then these 3 and then this one? Why was this part of Jesus' life? Because we've already seen that when he came out of the wilderness, crowds were already naturally flocking to him. He didn't need 12 guys as an advanced team. He didn't need marketing. He didn't need 12 guys spreading out going, hey, come here, Jesus, come here, Jesus. You better get there before get good seats. He didn't need that. Didn't need that at all. People were coming to be healed before he had the disciples. People were coming to hear him speak before he had disciples. So why? Why did Jesus pull these guys in? Because discipleship was Jesus' primary focus. Discipleship was Jesus' primary focus. Yeah, we know he taught a lot. We know he healed a lot. But it was discipleship. We have recorded Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus spoke in public. He healed in public. He did a number of things in public. We have a few recordings of what Jesus said privately to his disciples. But we don't have everything. In fact, the last few verses of the book of John says there's so many more things Jesus said and done that are not recorded because there wouldn't be enough room in the world to contain them all. And I think what he's referencing there was a lot of private conversations that were going on with these 12 and with these 3 and with Peter that we don't have a record of. But they're happening. And then those of you who've watched the Chosen series know that they show them traveling and walking together a lot because that's the only way they could travel. So these 12 and Jesus are walking along and they're having conversations. What do you think went on during those conversations? When they were going all the evenings when that the day was done, it was dark and very little light in the house. Was there conversations going on? I can only imagine what is going on with these 13 folks hanging around at night, getting ready to go to bed. In my mind, I'm thinking the Waltons. That's what I'm thinking. Good night, Peter. Good night, Andrew. Good night, John. Good night, James. Good night, Bartholomew. Good night, Matthew. Good night, Thomas. Good night, the other James. Some people think you're the less, but that's okay. Simon, you're a little zealot, but that's okay. Good night. Good night, Thaddeus. Good night, Judas. They probably said that a little lower, right? So, and I'm sure somebody in the group did say good night, John Boy. I'm pretty sure somebody in the group actually said that, right? When Jesus was with these guys, the very last night he was alive, the very last night, before they went to the Garden of Gethsemane, before he was arrested, he told them this: very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works I have been doing, and they will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. So his last instructions to them were, guys, we've been together a while. You've seen me do a lot of stuff. You're going to do greater. You're going to do these things and greater. And then not only he's telling his disciples, he's telling you and me this. He's telling us we're going to do things greater too. Now, why can he say that? Why can he say you guys are going to do greater things? Because they had been disciples for 3 years, approximately, with Jesus. They had been with Jesus, not simply listening to him, but they were being disciples. That means they were obedient. They were doing the things that he says to do. And he's seen them. He wouldn't have told them this if they were idiots. He would not have told them this if they had not been paying attention and had flunked every test he'd given them. He wouldn't have told them this if they were being a solo act and doing this all by themselves. He told them this because they had been together. And he told them this because he knew they would stay together. He told them that they're going to stay together during all this. He knew that they were going to be greater because they were together. They weren't going to be greater if they went off on their own. Who was the one guy who went off on his own of those 12? Judas. Look where that landed him. The other 11 stuck together. After the crucifixion, where did we find them? All together in the upper room. After Jesus' ascension, and he said, wait for me in Jerusalem, where were they? They were all together. In the book of Acts, what do we see? We see Peter and John together doing wonderful, amazing things. They were doing greater things because they were hanging together. When you look at history of churches, I will just say denominations for lack of a better way to say it, but in history of churches being built, we don't see anything being built on a singular person. And I'll pick on our own heritage because that's the heritage I know. That's the heritage I grew up in. In the Methodist Wesleyan heritage, our starter of the Methodist Church basically is a guy named John Wesley. John Wesley was part of the Church of England. Didn't like what was going on in the Church of England. And so he was trying to get a renewal movement within the Church of England. He didn't want to start another denomination. That was not his goal. His goal was to renew the denomination from the inside out. You know how he's doing that? He was doing that with a small group of people. His brother, Charles, was a part of that group. And they formed a holy club at Oxford. And a guy named George Whitefield was also a part of that early holy club. Small group of guys. Why were they getting together? They were getting together because they knew that they would be better together. And they could do things greater as a group. But here's our issue. Our issue is that the culture we're in today celebrates individualism. Our culture today pushes across the idea of meism, that it's all about me. And you know it. You feel it. You see it. And you buy into it a lot. How many likes did I get? How many shares did I get? We're there. We're there. I want to take you back to Jesus. Because Jesus said, basically by his lifestyle, that he was going against culture of his day. He was counter-culture. Because the culture that was there was all about the traditional Jewish church and religion that he followed, truthfully. He followed for 30 years. He didn't break with that tradition, but once he came out publicly, once the Holy Spirit had come down and descended on him like a dove at his baptism, and after he defeated Satan, in the wilderness. Everything he did after that was really countercultural. Because he was saying, this is not about you. This is not about you. It's about what we can do together. It's what we can do together. Let me give you a real life example of how this has played out. In 1949, the nation of China went full-blown communist. They bought in and said, they said, we're going to be communist. And if you do not know about communism, let me tell you, religion's not a part of it. Christianity is definitely not a part of it. Christians in China, beginning back in 49, all the way up to 2024, Christians can be imprisoned, Christians can be tortured, Christians can be killed. That's just the way it is. In 1949, there was approximately, and because it's a closed country, we can't get accurate counts, it was estimated between 1 and 4 million Christians lived in China. 1949, communism comes on. You would think, by the virtue of what communism espouses, that the church would just die. You would think. Today, between 70 and 100 million Christians are in China. Why? First of all, the power of the Holy Spirit. We don't discount that. But the primary reason beyond the presence of God is what we call house church. Small groups of people discreetly meeting. Small groups of people discreetly meeting. You see, if it was about me and just me alone, not much is going to happen and Christianity would die out. But because they started meeting together in small groups, in their houses discreetly, they flourished. They did greater things because they were together. So here's what I want you to remember. We find ease in isolation, but we are enriched in relation. We find ease in isolation, but we are enriched in relation. I know for many of us, there are things that we do that we just know it's easier to do by ourselves. I've fallen into that trap. Let me just do it because I can do it the way I want to do it, and because the way I believe I'm doing it is the right way, right? We all do that. We all do that. But what we find is we start doing a task and we pull along somebody else. That shared experience actually makes it more fulfilling. Makes it more fulfilling. There's a work group a couple years ago. We were working at somebody's house. There was probably 10 or 15 of us, a bunch of HA kids and me and another local dentist. And we did a lot of stuff, don't get me wrong, but just being around those kids and meeting this dentist, local dentist in town, that made the shared experience a whole lot better. And truthfully, we got a lot more done as a group than I could have done by myself or he could have done by himself. It takes a little more effort to include other people. It takes a little more planning. But we are enriched. Here's what we also find. Relationships enforce accountability. You don't like that word. You don't like that A word. But that's what is needed. That's what we need. That's what I need. Me and 3 other pastors meet every 2 weeks on Thursday mornings. The only thing we have in common is we're all Global Methodist Church pastors. We all came out of the United Methodist Church, and now we're all Global Methodists. We are in 4 different communities. We have 4 different types of churches. But the one thing that we have in common is, and besides being the Global Methodist Church pastor, is that we want to be more Christ-like. And we are following the model, truthfully, that John Wesley set up. So we ask each other these questions. How is it with your soul? What are you struggling with today? Where is God speaking into your life right now? See, these relationships that we formed, But we were not very close before we started meeting. But we instantly became accountable to each other in the way that we lived because we wanted to be more Christ-like. And that's what happens. We become more Christ-like through our connections. If we're meeting if we're gathering together with other people, we're becoming more Christ-like in our connections. You know, it worked for Jesus. Right? People flocked to Jesus. People listened to Jesus. People were encouraged by Jesus. People were healed by Jesus. And then when he brought others around him, they began doing the same thing. We'll do greater things when we're together. If it worked for Jesus, it will work for us. We find ease in isolation, but we are enriched in relation. 2.5 hours is end up what I commit to when I meet with my guys, between traveling both ways and sitting in a room with these guys. That's 2.5 hours a week. Would it be easier for me to just sit in my office? Would it be easier for me to just to sleep late at my house? Absolutely. Absolutely. But see, easy is not what we are called to do. Jesus has not said, come follow me and I will make your life easier. He said, come follow me to be like me. Come follow me to be like me. When those 11 disciples followed Jesus, and those 11 disciples were living like Jesus, 10 out of the 11 died a horrible death. There was nothing easy about their life and death. And let me be honest. Let me be real honest with you. Because I know you're looking at that guy and go, wait a second, you're a preacher, you get paid to be with other preachers. That's your job, right? Yeah, you can make a case for that. But I want to challenge you with this. You're not going to be able to gather together to be held accountable and to be enriched in your relationships 1 hour a week. It's not going to happen. 1 hour a week is not going to happen. Let me remind you of a few things that you do more than 1 hour a week. You put fuel in your bodies more than 1 hour a week. You know that? Some of you do it more than 1 hour a day, but that's another story, right? Many of you in this room, I know, because I see your cars parked at different places of business, that you're working out your body more than 1 hour a week. Some of us aren't. Okay. And here's what I do know. Every one of you in this room, every one of you watching online, you put more than 1 hour a week into entertainment. I know that. And I know all of you put more than 1 hour a week on your screen time. I know that. Is it easier? Yeah. Is it easier to go work out alone? Is it easier to eat a meal by yourself? Yeah. What's it going to take for you to be more Christ-like? It's going to take you to gather with other people. To gather with other people. Not in isolation, but in relation. So next week we're going to have some small group people set up in the breezeway. They'll let you know, hey, we're going to meet Sunday nights or Wednesday nights or Thursday nights or Monday, whatever day. We'd love to have you come. And I hope many of you participate, and I hope many of you are interested in that. But I'm not so naive to think this, that some of you are going to walk down that breezeway next week, and you're going to say, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work, that doesn't work. And I want to say, you know what? That's okay. Because technically, you don't need our help to do this. Did you know that? The Global Methodist Church Conference, the Alabama Emerald Coast Conference that I'm a part of, my other 3 guys are a part of, they didn't do anything to put us guys together. We just got together. I was talking to a person this week, and there's already 3 couples in our church just meeting together to have fun, and they're in the process of moving. Wait a second, we're already meeting together. Let's just be more intentional about being like Jesus. To be enriched in our relationships and to be more Christ-like and hold each other accountable. Let's just be a little more intentional because we're already meeting together anyway. So there's no cookie-cutter approach. The deal is, just don't be in isolation. Be in relation. Jesus has called us, He's told His disciples, the last thing He told His disciples, hey, go make disciples of others. He didn't say go make Christians. He didn't say go make believers. He didn't say go make God-fearers. He said go make disciples. And disciples make disciples who make disciples who make disciples. What happens when we do that? Greater things. Greater things. I want to invite you to be a part of something greater. God, we ask that in these moments that you would remind us literally that you did not place us in this world to live in isolation. You made us to be in relation. And God, we have to be intentional. You were intentional about calling your James and John and Peter. You were intentional about calling the other 9 to walk the journey of faith with you. And God, may we be intentional about gathering others around us so that we can do greater things. Not for our sake, but for yours. Not for our glory, but for yours. And God, oh God, when that happens, when we're able to come together, we come out of our isolation and come into relation. God, you start working. Greater things happen. And we become a part of something that is greater than ourselves. So God, use us today. Remind us today that you are using us to build your church.